We're here with Jay Bloom, and we've got a final segment, part of what I really enjoy in these interviews with some of the experts and pioneers in the field of aging, especially those who have been in Portland and seen an evolution. Jay, you've seen where Portland was when you arrived here, and you've been in Portland working in the infrastructure and helping build some of the structure of where Portland's issues on aging are. And where do you think they're going?
Well, it's always, there's no Yogi Berra statement. It's always at risk when you try to predict the future. In 2001, when I did those essays, I came across a quote that has always stayed with me. And it was by Carl Van Horn from Rutgers University. And he said, how the boomers age will cause more social change than women entering the workforce then 30 years ago, now be 40 years ago. And I've thought about that particular quote and still do, because the world my granddaughters are growing up in is an entirely different world than their daughter, than my wife,
Right.
than my mother, let alone my grandmother. The just all sorts of different kinds of opportunities and paradigms and whatnot. And this gentleman at Rutgers said how the boomers age is going to cause more social change than the women's movement did 40 years ago. And so for me, it basically means that every aspect of our culture is going to change in a variety of ways. Like the women's movement, you're going to see changes in employer practices. Again, old paradigm in HR used to be fairness was you treated everybody the same. Going forward, you're going to have new employee practices that says how do you customize workplaces that fit all different age groups. So not only how do we have phased retirement and flexible work schedules for older adults, but young people as well. So the workplace will change, similar to what the women's movement did with family leave and so forth there. Education is going to change. Fastest growing area for universities are older adults going back to school.
And are they going back to school for careers or
both,
for knowledge?
All sorts of. Some it's enrichment, some of it's social, some of it's re-careering, some is because they have to develop new skills
or a combination of those.
Or a combination of both. Or again, the value of lifelong learning in terms of the brain science. So our educational system will change. I don't think, for example, schools of the future, primary and secondary schools, will be strictly just for K through 12. I believe they're going to be community centers. You can't have that amount of physical capital locked in a school for only 180 days part-time. You can't maintain and invest the financial resource. And so why not make it more of a community center where mutual learning can occur, where you're using those computer labs year-round, where community colleges are offering classes there, and so forth, more intergenerational interaction. So I already talked about the changes in healthcare. There's no way we're going to be able to afford all the tests, all the procedures. We're going to increasingly move to much more a self-directive health promotional system. So there's just a variety of ways that I think you're going to see change. More multi-generational households. Communes will come back in their own way.
Like in the co-housing and
co-housing
the
and generational housing. More of Golden Girls housing, where particularly when you have the percentage of more older women than men, where collectively they're coming together for mutual caregiving, etc. So the consumer products and services, you can't take that amount of purchasing power and not have markets figure out 101 ways to separate themselves. So more intergenerational travel. Clearly, older adults, research is pointing out they're more interested in experiences than material things. So what are going to be those experiential things that get developed and pursued? So I think we're just on the beginning stages of what the next 10, 20 years are going to be. I mean, the youngest boomer is age 50 now. And for the next 15 years, as I said, 10,000 people turning a day. And they're the most educated, most healthy, and in many cases the most affluent. So what are they going to do? How will they impact and
Right.
ripple through? That's not only occurring in Portland and Oregon, but the U.S. and internationally.
And how will the internet fit in? How will the social side of social media fit in?
Well, for me, it's a little bit, I use eHarmony as an example.
Okay.
eHarmony is a nice way to potentially get an introduction to people, but the proof in the pudding is when you actually meet them. And so, there was a futurist by the name of John Nesbitt who wrote a book quite a few years ago called Megatrends. And one of the 10 megatrends, he said, is we'll have both high touch and high tech. And I would say, we're never going to lose the high technology part, and that's going to increasingly occur. But there's an equal desire for the high touch.
You didn't know that I brought this, not to be used for this, but this is the most recent issue. This is the August issue of Mind Magazine, with a cover story and features that I didn't think was the science was as thick as it really is on human touch. And that's why that combination, you point out it as an example, to meet someone and then actually have that second component. That's the issue of having intergenerations work together on challenges and problems and not think that it can be solved by problems and high tech. But I like that. High tech and high touch can work together.
You're the brain guy. It's both the left brain and the right brain.
Sure.
And technology is a pretty strong left brain world, but a lot of people would say, we're still hot wired, pretty right brained.
Yeah.
And the older adult, I think, researchers increasingly show are ones where they tend to marry those two in a much more robust way.
And that generation that we're working with, talking about having 15 more years of boomers reaching 65, it's the most creative group that's ever been on the face of the planet. And if we go to your returnment versus retirement, isn't that group poised to help overcome challenges by incorporating those millennial brains that are faster than ours with ours that are actually more creative and try to solve the problems together?
I use the metaphor. You're always trying to struggle to describe these concepts, but I like to use the alternative energy as a metaphor. We know that sun and wind and thermal and wave are alternative energy sources, but we also know you just can't plug them into the grid. You have to create mechanisms and tools to do that. Well, I believe that older adults are also a renewable resource, but you just can't leave it up to the individual to go try to find these pathways. We have to create both the awareness of these alternative energy sources or alternative human capital, and then we need to create the mechanisms and mindsets to plug them in. And so that's, for me, why intergenerational work is ultimately related to sustainability.
Right.
We want to create a place that's good for now, and we want a place that's good for the future. And I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful that older adults will increasingly, both for their own benefit, from a selfish standpoint, if I want to live longer, you're going to find that isolation's a killer, that not having a purpose is a killer, and so to stay engaged is my quote that I like to use. Unless you're engaged in your later years, you're just dying longer, not living longer.
Well, we're going to end with a flourish because we'll bloom on this one. Jay,
Okay.
Thank you very much for
Pleasure.
everything that we're talking about now might come true, but the goal is to have the students who are taking these courses take these ideas and help shape this, because Jay and I know where things are and we can hope that things will get better, but what we've just heard is really a prediction for hope, so that we can leverage those intergenerational problem solvers to work together. So thank you again, Jay.
Pleasure.